I have thoroughly enjoyed our testimonial services. Wow, what God has done through the life of so many different people. These testimonies really lift God up. We're not talking about the greatness of the person, we're talking about the greatness of Jesus Christ. And my wife gave her testimony last Sunday night, and I've heard her give her testimony several times, but it was so powerful last Sunday night. And if you was not here and did not hear that, you need to go to the website. It's on the website. All the testimonies that we've had is on the website. Tonight, Dovie Brown's going to come and give her testimony. And she says it's going to be a little bit long, and I think she says it's going to be a little bit long because she's lived longer than others. Maybe that's the reason why. Would you come, Dovie, please? God bless you.
Y'all pray for me as I give this, that I can get through it. I asked Brother Ellison, I said, are you going to get that pulpit up there so I can hide behind it? Y'all can't see my knees shaking. He said, no, we're not going to get it up there. So y'all just pray for me as I try to give this. I was born W. Huff at Maybeville, Arkansas in 1930. My daddy is John A. Huff from Maybeville, Arkansas. My mother was Cecil Marie Pruitt from Sardis, Arkansas. Both of my grandparents were Christians, so our families all came from Christian families, and that was a God-sent blessing. My parents started out right with us. I can remember my mom had this great big old Bible. It had big letters in it, and in the back of that Bible, it had children's Bible stories. And I remember my mom would open that big Bible up, and she would read the children's Bible stories to us. And my dad loved to sing, and he would gather us around, us kids, as we got big enough to sing. He would gather us around, and we would all sing. My mother was a Baptist. My dad was a Methodist. But my mother, being a submissive wife, she went where my dad had wanted to go. And then they went to the Maybeville Missionary Baptist Church in Maybeville, Arkansas. When I was about 8 or 9, one Easter Sunday, had my pretty dress on for Easter, and about 4 or 5 of us little girls decided we wanted to join the church. And that's what it was to me. We just joined the church. I can't, and I'm sure they must have, but I can't even remember them asking me if I had accepted Jesus Christ as my Savior. And I know that it had been taught because that little song we sang a while ago about, what was it, that last one we sang? Can't you remember now what it was? But anyway, that was one of the songs. My aunt was my Sunday school teacher, and that was one of the songs that she had taught us, and it taught us about Jesus. But all I can remember, of course, 8 or 9 years ago, that's a long time ago, only thing I can remember is I'm dipping that rose in that bowl of water and sprinkling it on my head. I probably was more worried about getting water on my new little Easter dress than I was anything else. But we went on, and we went there for a while. My dad was a farmer, and my mother was a homemaker. During the Depression, jobs were hard to find. And my dad had been working with my granddad on the farm, and they just couldn't find another job. So him and my uncle, they bought a truck, and they went to hauling for all the farms around there, cattle to the market and vegetables and things to the market. But that even got to where they couldn't even make the payments on their truck. So they had heard about having jobs in Houston. So they go to Houston. I can remember my mama begging, John, please don't go. And he said, Mom, I have to. That's the only way I've got to make a living. So they came to Houston. Well, it seemed like months passed, and they never made enough money to get me, my mother, and my brother and my sister, and my aunt and her little boy. But somebody in Houston, a friend of my aunt's, told them, your husband and John got him a girlfriend. You better get up here. Now, whether that was the truth or not, I never did know. But anyway, Aunt Bood wrote and said, either you come get us or I'm coming up there. So he came and got us, and we went up there, and we stayed there for a little while. I don't even remember going to church while we were there. We stayed about a year and a half there until my mother got pregnant with twins, and my mother was having a lot of medical problems, and my granddad heard about it. My daddy's dad heard about it, and he said, "John, my little house is vacant. Bring your children and come and stay and help me farm." We moved to Sardis, Arkansas. We stayed there for a couple of years, and then we moved to Sardis, Arkansas in 1943 to sharecrop with my uncle, my mother's brother. I was 13 at that time, and John was 10, Pat 8, the twins were 6, and Polly was born about a year and a half after we got there. And then 18 months later, my baby brother, the 8th one, was born. Now, I got plenty of training how to take care of children until I got big enough to go to the field. But I learned a lot of lessons of responsibility during those young years. When we moved to Sardis, there wasn't a Methodist church there, but there was a Baptist church in walking distance. My aunt and uncle went there, and they talked Dad into going to the Baptist church. Dad went to the Baptist church, and he began to kindly agree with the Baptist doctrine. And then one day, the choir director was sick. He was an older man, and a lot of times at night especially, he wouldn't be there. And he said, "John," said, would you come and, can you direct singing?" He said, "I never have, but I played in a band at school. I know a little music, so I'll try." So he began to lead the singing for him. We had a revival about that time, and I was about 15. And I went up for prayer that night with several other people, and somebody was saved. And Aunt Tancy's band went to shouting. Did you ever hear a Baptist shout? I never had before, but it sure did scare me. But and we had a wonderful service that night, and even after they got outside, somebody was saved. I don't know who Aunt Tancy was, whose aunt she was, but everybody called her Aunt Tancy. But when that other person got saved, Aunt Tancy got happy, and she began to shout again. During this week, I was very much under conviction. And one afternoon before time to go to church, Dad sent me down in the pasture to get the cows. And right down there on that hillside is where I give my heart to the Lord. But I didn't tell my mom and Dad because they hadn't had to join the church there yet. The other night, some of them kind of laughed at me when I told them I know I was saved because I quit running with kids that didn't go to church, and I quit telling dirty jokes. They laughed at me about telling dirty jokes. Well, that was about the worst thing that I had done at that time because my daddy had a tight rein on me. When I was 15, my dad bought us a farm. Now, this old house was a great big old 2-bedroom house with great high ceilings, tin top, unpainted outside, great big porch across the front, and a great big side shed built across the back. But this was our first home, and we were proud of that home. My mom and Dad's bed and my baby brother's bed was in one end of that room. The fireplace was over here, and we had a library table. It was a homemade table that somebody had given my mom and Dad when they got married. We had our lessons there by an Aladdin lamp. We only had that one Aladdin lamp. The rest of them was just little coil lamps. But we could see a lot better by that Aladdin lamp. And when we used that room for our living room, we brought the chairs from the dining room into that room when we had company. The other big room had 2 double beds, and that's where us 5 girls slept. And then across the back, we had this kitchen, and my dad had bought my mom a new stove. And she was so proud of that stove. It was an iron cook stove, a big reservoir here and a warming oven up here, and she was so proud of it. My dad said with 8 kids, Mom needs a good stove. So she got her stove. And in the dining room was a homemade table with a bench behind with the cane chairs around. And you know, it's funny and this time was our time, a family time. When my dad prayed, he didn't just ask the blessing upon the food. He prayed for his family. And, you know, back in my mind, even though I was 6 years old when Dad was supposed to have done that, and I was 15 now, back in my mind, I worried about, did my dad really love my mom? But, you know, when my dad began to say grace at that table, and he prayed so much, when he was through praying, he would always reach over, hug and kiss Mom, and say, I love you. That was my security. That told me that my dad really did love my mom. Then the other little room at the end was another bedroom where John and David slept. This house wasn't much, but we were proud of it because it was our first home. Every night after supper, we would gather around Dad. You remember the old Brown favorite hymnals? Well, that's what we would sing out of. And my dad loved to sing. And he would gather us around, and we would sing. That was our entertainment. We didn't have a TV, and the radio, most of the time, the battery was run down on. But we entertained ourselves. And that was really precious times to us because it was times the family was together. We were happy that we had parents that were at home with us, and they trained us up in the way we should go. That was a God's blessing. We were all up at 4:30 of a morning. Mom started breakfast. Patsy helped get the school-age children ready for church. Me and Dad and John went to the barn, and we milked the cows and fed the pigs and the horses. And then we come home to a good home-cooked breakfast. Mom always made homemade biscuits, and of course we had either bacon or ham that we had cured, and had jelly and butter and milk, and we had plenty to eat and a lot of love in our family. But when it was school days, we all got up, walked a mile and a half to catch the bus, and then we rode the bus 10 miles to school. And of course this happened every evening. But you know, when school was out in the summertime, it's kind of different from today. Where most kids are out playing and having a good time today, this was our time that we learned more lessons in that summer than we learned at school. We learned responsibility. We learned that we had jobs that needed to be done, and we had to do those jobs. We had to plant the plants. We had to hoe the vegetables. Then we had to gather them, and my dad took them to the market. This learned us responsibilities early in life. We found out that there was a Methodist church and a Baptist church in the area, and my dad chose to go to the Baptist church. And of course, my dad was, being Methodist, he had to be baptized again, so I went up too and had told him about being saved back at Sardis. And me and my dad was both baptized in a little creek there close by the church. My dad became the choir director of that church. And you know, I don't know how my dad could always see everybody, it seemed like. He knew what we did and what we didn't do, and brother, the price was to pay. My dad never said, if you do that again, you get a spanking. Or if you don't do that, you get a spanking. He said, don't do that again. And we knew he meant just that. I think I got 3 whippings in my whole life. I didn't want the 4th one. My daddy would be leading singing. Mom sitting on one end of the 3rd or 4th row. I sat on the other, and the 7 kids was between us. He would be up there directing singing. He never missed a beat. He would see one of them doing something, pop that finger and just keep a beating. Never said a word, just pop that finger. He could pop that finger the loudest I believe I ever heard. What was so funny, what was so miserable to some of the kids, they didn't really know which one he popped the finger at, because maybe some of them was moving around and doing some little things that they shouldn't. But they knew before the day was over, they would get either a lecture from the Bible or they would get a spanking. I can remember my brother, when he was about 12 years old, stole $5 out of my dad's pocket. That was Dad's seed money. Back in those days, we had plenty to eat, we had plenty to wear. Now, they might be made out of chicken feed sacks, but we had plenty to wear. But money was scarce. So my little brother, he went to the store, he bought all his little friends a nickel sack of candy. Boy, you could get a big sack of candy for a nickel. He gave the kids. Well, my 2 cousins happened to be one of those boys. When they come home with the sack of candy, my uncle knew that John wasn't supposed to have that money. He went and told my dad. But Uncle Melvin was gone when John got home. Well, when he come in, he said, John, did you get that $5 out of my billfold? No, sir. He said, John, did you buy John, Tom, and Grogan some candy? Yes, sir. Where did you get it? Out of your billfold. Okay, so instead of getting a thrashing, my daddy got his Bible. He taught him about stealing, and he taught him about lying. And I can just see my little brother. he would cower down as my daddy talked to him, and he'd say, "Son, look at me." And he would come back up, you know. And when it was all over, John said, "I'd rather had a whooping any day." But my dad disciplined us, and I thank God he did. At first, we would go to church on Sunday, and then we would come home and gather a load to go to the market Monday morning. Our preacher said, "Brother John, if you will wait till Monday morning to gather that load and take it in later in the day, you will prosper just as much or more." My dad wanted to get the prize, and the prize was the first one that got there with the best vegetables of a morning at the curb market. But my dad decided, well, he'd try it. He tried it, and it worked. Boy, we sure did like that preacher. When I was 16 years old, there was this good-looking soldier boy came to our church. And that morning, the song director wasn't there, and this preacher asked, "Who will volunteer to lead the singing?" Nobody volunteered. He said, "Come on, somebody volunteer." So this young man, his name was Carl Duck Brown. Now that Duck, his father named all those boys some kind of a nickname. When Duck was just learning to walk, they said he waddled like a little duck. So he carried that nickname. Even after we got to Houston, we'd get Christmas cards, Mr. and Mrs. Duck Brown. But anyway, he raised his hand. He said, "I'll try." So he got up there and he led the singing. Well, his Uncle Bill went to that church too, and he'd put Duck up to asking me for a date. So Duck come around. We were all sitting around, teenagers around this pot-bellied stove out in the middle of this little one-room church. And he says, "I hear you're having a hayride Friday night." "Yeah, we sure are." "Can I pick you up?" "Oh, I'll be there." And I thought, you silly thing, why did you say that? Here you've been praying for a boyfriend, and he just turned around and walked off, of course. So anyway, Uncle Bill, his uncle, furnished a team in the wagon, and this wagon had to put a hay frame on the wagon and had all the hay on it, and had 2 bales of hay up here, and Duck and his Uncle Bill sat on this to drive the team. Well, it seemed like Duck was flirting all these other girls, and he wasn't saying much to me. So we went down this road, went a real bumpy road. We were going to the lake to have a weenie roast, and so it got kind of bumpy, and I reached up and got a hold of the bale of hay. I accidentally touched his hand. Anyway, he put his hand over on mine. He said, "Won't you come up here and sit by me?" So I thought, well, I done turned him down a couple times. I might better get up there. So I got up there and sat with him. Well, the rest of the time we were together at the picnic. We sang songs, played games, and then we went back to the and roasted our weenies and had our lunch. And then we went back to the church. I done lost my place. And he asked to take me home. Well, before I thought about it, I said, "I'm not going home. I'm going home with Beth." Well, he just turned around and walked off. Beth said, "You silly thing. You could have told him to take you to my house." I thought, well, I goofed again. But then Saturday morning, I got up and I washed my hair. My hair was real long. Got up and washed my hair, and I rolled my hair. Now, some of you older ladies may understand this. I didn't have no rollers, but I tore me some little rags about this wide and about this long and put brown paper on them, and you roll your hair up on that and tied it. And when it got dry, you had a curl. And here I was with all these rags in my head, and I looked down, and here come that little blue 41 Plymouth. Oh, no. Here comes Duck. And here he come, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to take my little brothers to the music lessons. Won't you come go with us to the Benton, and we'll go to a movie while they're taking lessons?" I said, "My hair's wet, and it's rolled up. I can't take it down." He said, "Put a bandana on it." I said, "And you don't mind?" He said, "No, nobody's going to see you." So I put a headscarf on, and I went with him. Then when he come back from the show, he asked me if he could come get me at Sunday. And I said, okay. From then on, Sunday he'd come home for us for dinner, and then we'd go to the ball game, and then we'd come back to church again. And then on Wednesday night, he would come get me for prayer meeting. First, he would bring his mom and his little boys to pick me up, and he'd bring his mom and little boys to take me home. But it kind of upset me for Mom and them two little boys to sit out there and watch him kiss me goodnight. So the next day, he always sent me a note by his brothers to school, and I'd send him one back. And that Monday morning, he said, "Can I pick you up Wednesday night for church?" I wrote him back, and I said, "I can ride with my family good as I can with yours." So I got a letter back the next day. "I'll take Mama to church first, and then I'll pick you up." After I graduated in May of 1947, I was working in Little Rock, and I was living with my aunt and uncle that lived right across from the church, and the bus run from Benton to Little Rock, and I could ride to work. So Duck came to see me one night, and he had an engagement ring, and he asked me to marry him. And I said, "You pay down on a house, and I'll pay down on furniture, and we'll get married in a couple of years." So he says, "Okay." So about 2 months later, he come by, and he said, "I just paid down on a house." I said, "Well, I got some furniture in the layaway." And he said, "You ready to get married?" I said, "Oh, let's wait a little while longer." I wasn't but 17 years old. And so I said, "Let's wait a little longer." And he said, "Well, listen, I'm not going to ask you again. When you get ready to get married, you come tell me." So about 2 months later, I decided, well, I might better say yes. So we got married. We were both members of Collegeville Baptist Church, and that's where we were married, and Brother Conger married us. We moved to our little house. It was made of shiplap, unpainted lumber. 4-room house, not 4-bedroom, 4-room house. Had a place for a bath, but no bath in there yet. We had to carry our water from a spring. We had no electricity. But we were proud of that little house because it was ours. The Sunday we came home from our honeymoon, we went to church. We never asked, "Are we going to church?" We just got up and got ready to go. Our first baby, Linda Lou, was born on August 21st of 1949. Our second baby girl, Diane, was born November the 30th, 1951. We moved into Salem, Arkansas when I was pregnant with Vicki, and she was born July the 23rd, 1954. We went to Oak Grove Missionary Baptist Church until it had a split, and then we got out of church. And we were out of church for about a year, and my dad said, "Kids, get those babies back in church. You need to get those babies back in church." Well, the next Sunday was a New Year's Sunday. It was New Year's Day on that Sunday, and the old devil was at work again. Got up Sunday morning, and Linda and Sherry had chicken pox all over them. So we didn't get to go to church that Sunday nor the next one. But then we got back in church, and we'd been faithful ever since. Duck's dad moved to the community, and each time that his mom would see him go to visit his dad, she would cause us a lot of trouble and a lot of heartache. And she would tell him she didn't want him to go see his dad. And he would tell her, "Mom, you made him my dad. I love him, and I will go to see him." But it really upset Duck. We had bought a service station in Benton and was doing very good, but every time we had a family get-together, this would happen. Duck's cousin lived here on Cary Lane here in Deer Park, and she said, "Y'all move out here. Jobs are good, and houses. You can buy a house here for $500 down and $50 a month." And boy, we thought that was really good. So we come to Houston in 1956. Duck got a job with heavy haulers. We went to church from Pilgrim Rest Baptist Church. At first, they were meeting in a community building, but then a lady named Dovie gave us some land, and we was going to build a church. Our pastor told us, "If each one of you will borrow $500 and buy a $500 bond, we can start building a church." Well, that was a lot of money to us. We were really barely making our payments. My husband was only making $75 a week, and we had bought a new house, and payments was $72 a month. So we just couldn't hardly see how we could do it. But Brother Rayburn said, "You pray about it. I guarantee you, if you will pledge that $500 and buy that bond, God will see that you can pay for it. So we went home that night and prayed, and me doing the one that done the bills, I said, what are we going to do, Dad? He said, God has never let us down yet, and he won't let us down now. We're going to buy that bond. And I borrowed that money to buy the bond, and we did, and we paid it back, $19 a month. And you know, we never missed the payment. Now, God didn't send no money down into our hand, but he always made a job available for my husband to make some extra money. Our first baby girl, Carla Sue, was born December the 25th, 11:49, right at dinner time. But she was the best Christmas present we ever had. We built our church, and we had just finished it, and they had just put in the baptistry, and we were standing there admiring their handiwork, and our pastor come up, and he said, me and the deacon's wife now, we're standing there, and he said, I may get to baptize you two one of these days. Well, we all kind of laughed. I didn't think much about it then, but when I got home, I got to thinking, now, why did he say that? Do we not act like Christians? And, you know, off and on, it kind of bothered me at times. Well, Duck was working for heavy haulers. He was away from home a lot, and we hated it, and we had prayed for a better job. We heard that Armco Steel was hiring, and he went, and they hired him. So he could be home with his family. This was another blessing from God. We started looking for a house in Pasadena and also a church. We met Brother Havis McBride, the pastor, and we found a house at 712 Pauline. We didn't have much money, but Duck had a Harley Davidson motorcycle, and they took it on a trade in on the house as a down payment. We started going to Fellowship Church in Pasadena, Texas in 1962. We were so blessed. We were given a whole $5 a week. And then the pastor began to preach on tithing. And I told my husband, I said, you know, how in the world are we going to tithe? I said, that's going to be $12.50 a week. How are we going to do it? He said, babe, God has never let us down. He's not going to do it this time. God blessed us again. The man across the street had an air conditioning business, and he would bring home work at night, and he asked Carl to help him. And he told him, Carl, you're a natural at this work. Take your course at the Pasadena High School, and then I can use you to go and repair air conditioners as well. And he did. Well, this little job helped to make our tithe at church, and helped to make a little bit more too. We were very much involved in our church at Fellowship. We began to teach, sing in the choir. We were youth sponsors, and then they set aside my husband to be a deacon. And he was ordained. We loved our church, and this church done a lot of mission work. We had already had 3 or 4 churches that Fellowship had sponsored. We had a missionary on the field at that time, and he said, folks, we need to put another man on the field. He said, I'll up my offering X amount of dollars. I forgot what it was. And if you will up yours that much, we can put another man on the field. And so we all give our promise of how much that we would give. We put another man on the field, and we never missed the payment of it. We upped our offering, and we put another man on the field. And by the grace of God, we did, and the money always come in. Duck got laid off, of course, at Armco. Of course, this worried me because I had done the bills. I said, what are we going to do about our tithe? He said, we're going to do just exactly what we're paying now. God has never let us down. He's not going to let us down this time. And so we did. And he went to White's store. That was where this air conditioning man had led him to help him work. And he went there, and they gave him a job while he was laid off, putting in air conditioners and repairing them. Again, God had blessed. I guess Duck's strong faith in the Lord is what made my faith be stronger. I learned to depend on God more. God had made this available to us because of the tithes and things that we had given, I believe. Carla was 2 years old when we moved to Pasadena. Vicki was 7. Sherry was 9, and Linda was 11. We had the natural things that parents go through with teenagers. But we taught our girls to respect us as their parents. We taught them to respect their elders. We taught them responsibility. We give them jobs, and we expect them to do their jobs. I thank God that they never give us a whole lot of trouble. But like most people, we had one incident that really broke our heart. But with the love of a good church by standing behind us and the grace of God, he took us through this, and it made us better Christians because of it. Duck loved his family dearly. He was one asked, "Carl, what in the world do you do with 4 girls?" He said, "I do with 4 girls exactly what I would do with 4 boys." He said, "I take them to church Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night." He said, "I play with them and I pray with them." He said, I take them fishing, I take them hunting, I take them camping, I take them skiing. I take them to church camp. I go with them to church camp. He said, "I do with my girls exactly what I would have done with 4 boys." His mother had divorced when he was in service, and it devastated Carl, or Duck. He never wanted this to happen to his family, and he worked hard at being a good husband and father. Miss Brown, his mother, wanted to come live with us, so we bought a bigger house. Now, she'd already lived with 2 other brothers, and it didn't work. But we told her, "Okay, we're going to move you here, but now once we move you here, you're going to stay." She was in Arkansas. "We won't move you back." So she came to live with us. We told her, "You will have to adjust to our time, our lifestyle," because my husband worked shift work. She was used to going to bed at dark, and she got up at daybreak. Well, with shift work, you didn't know when you was going to get up and when you was going to go to bed. There was times when I would get so upset because I would always lots of times when he come in from work, when he worked nights, he would go by White's and pick up an air conditioner and bring it to work on it. And he didn't want breakfast when he first come in. He wanted to finish whatever his work was. He'd eat breakfast and he'd take a bath and go to bed. But Miss Brown was on to me about, "Why don't you fix him his breakfast? Won't you get his breakfast?" And I really got upset. So I began to stay down at the other end of the house and do all until I heard him come in from work, and I would clean up all the other end of the house before I'd even go down into the kitchen because I knew Miss Brown would be down there wanting me to get Duck's breakfast ready. We were in revival, and I was really upset about the way I was feeling about his mother, and I got to thinking what that preacher said about baptizing me, and I got to thinking, well, am I really a Christian? Why am I feeling this way? I shouldn't feel this way toward his mother. So I had just got so worried about it. I went up that night, and I prayed the sinner's prayer again, and I was baptized. But deep down in my heart, I know, sitting on that hillside when I was 15 years old is when I was saved. We tried to get Miss Brown to stay, but she decided she was well enough to go home. And my husband reminded her, "Mom, I told you when you moved here, you was to stay here. I will not take you home." So she called her baby brother, and he said, "Let me talk to Duck." So Duck said, "Whatever you think, Wilbur." He said, "Well, my wife won't let me bring her to my house, but if you think it's okay, I'll come get her and take her home." I said, "That's your decision." He said, "That's your decision." So she went home, and bless her heart, she died about 3 years later. In 1999, my husband took Alzheimer's, and he slowly got worse. Well, really, it took about 4 years for him to really get bad, 3 or 4 years. He got to where he would call me Bernice. That was his cousin. One day I had her come over, and when she come in, well, he called her Bernice, but yet he still act like he didn't know who I was sitting over. He'd talk about me like I wasn't even sitting there. But in about an hour, he began to recognize me. And things went okay for a few months. Then one day, he come in, he said, "Babe, we're going to have to get those kids off that trampoline down there. Somebody's going to get hurt." I said, "Honey, there's nobody on the trampoline." He said, "I can see them. They're right down there." I said, "Honey, that's a step ladder you put up there where the kids got up on the trampoline when you were mowing." Well, he wasn't satisfied, so I just went down there with him, and he touched the steps, and he just laughed, and he said, "That is the steps, isn't it?" But little things like that began to happen. And we'd always laugh about it. But one night I woke up and I heard him hollering, "Dove, Dove, Dove." He just got more agitated. And I went in there, and he was sitting down in front of the commode. He had the back of the commode, and he was shaking it. And he was calling my name. And I come to the door, and I said, "Babe, here I am." He looked up at me with sad eyes. He said, "I thought I couldn't wake you up. I thought you was sitting here, and I couldn't wake you up." But I got him up, and I took him back to bed. And the next day, he remembered it, and he told his neighbor about it. He said, "I almost called you because I thought I couldn't get Duck awake." He said, "Mr. Brown, anytime you need me, you just call me." So many little things happened that I didn't tell the kids because I didn't want to worry them, and I kept praying things would get better. Then one morning at 6 a.m., he got up. He said, "Babe, get up. I got to go see what time I go to work." I said, "Honey, get back in the bed. You've been retired 15 years. Get back in the bed." So he got back in the bed. About 30 more minutes, he got up again. "Get up, babe. I got to go see what time I go to work." Well, after he had retired, we always made the bed up together. It's a big old king-size bed. Well, Buddy, that morning, he went to making me up in the bed. So I thought, well, I better get up. So I got up and I cooked breakfast. And I done this very slowly because I thought lots of times as the day would go on, as he get to moving around, he would get okay. Linda had moved in with us to help me take care of him, and she come in about that time, and he didn't know who she was. I called Sherry, and she called Carla, and they came over. And they were there for a while, and they realized they had to go back to work. Well, he had kindly got a little better, but he still didn't act like he didn't know who we were. And she said, "Mom, you want me to stay?" Or said, "We've got to go to work," or "You want me to stay?" I said, "No, I'll call Harold." That was a man from our church. "I'll call Harold. He'll come over." So I called Harold, and he said he'd come. So we went outside, and he kept saying, "How did I get here? Something's wrong. Something's not right." I said, "Honey," he said, "when are we going to go home?" I said, "Honey, we're home. We've been living here 26 years. And he could remember coming from Arkansas to Houston to 712 Pauline, but he could not remember coming to Sinclair. The phone rang, and I went to answer the phone, and when I come back outside, I couldn't find him. I went to the front yard, and he was going down the road. I ran and caught up with him, and I said, "Honey, come on. I'm making coffee. Harold's coming for coffee." Well, by that time, he seemed like he kind of knew who I was. And so he came on back with me, and Harold came over. And while they were drinking coffee, I went in and called the VA and told them what was happening, and they said, "Bring him in." So we took him to the hospital. After about a week, I was very exhausted, staying up there night and day. Sometimes he would know me, and some days he wouldn't. Sherry realized me being wore out, and my brother David and his wife Jenny was down here, and she brought them up to spend the day with him and let me come home and take a bath and rest for the day. And while they were there, he told Jenny, "Jenny, you know how to get out of France?" Well, of course, Jenny had dealt with Alzheimer's patients before, and she said, "Yeah, I know how to get out." He said, "Well, you know, the password's trick or treat." She said, "Yeah, I know." He said, "You see that man over there on the building?" Said, "He's got a gun. Watch him, he'll shoot you." But when I came back that night, she forgot to tell me about this. Well, after it got about dark, he began to say, "The house is on fire. The house is on fire. We got to get out of here. The house is on fire." So I called a nurse, and they came in to give him a shot. And so he settled down for a few minutes, and directly he come over and he said, "If I have to throw you over my shoulder and carry you out of here, we got to get out of this place." And so I rang for the nurse, and they came, and they brought a wheelchair, and they gave him another shot and put him in the wheelchair. She said, "Roll him around till he gets sleepy," and I did. When he began to get sleepy, I took him and put him to bed, and I was sitting on the bed and talking to him. He said, honey, where's my guns? I told him they were home. I said, what do you want with your guns? And he said, I'm going to have to kill you. And I'm going to put that double barrel shotgun right here and pull the trigger. I said, honey, why would you want to do that? He said, see that man sitting on that building? He's got a gun, and no telling what he'll do to us before he kills us. So I put my arms around him, and I told him, I said, baby, I'll go get the guns in the morning, and we'll go together. I began to cry. He went to sleep, and I began to cry. And I moved out into the hall so he wouldn't hear me. And a doctor came along about that time, and he said, what's the matter, Miss Brown? I told him, and he said, Miss Brown, you have got to have some help. I said, we promised each other we would take care of each other. And I said, I have to take care of him. He said, Miss Brown, how long has it been since you've had a good night's sleep? I thought for a while, and I said, well, I guess about 3 years. He said, that's what I'm talking about. He says, if you take him home, you will become his enemy. He won't want you to give him his medicine. He won't want you to change his diaper. He won't want you to change his clothes and give him a bath. He won't want you to put your pajamas on him. Then you'll be his enemy. But if you'll take him to the home, he will be glad to see you when you come in, and you will be his friend. I said, well, I'll have to think about it and pray about it. I talked to the girls, and I talked to the doctor, and I talked to our pastor, and they all convinced me that this was best for both of us. But I told the girls, I agree, but I can't do it. I can't put him there. You'll have to. And I sat there in the car, and I watched him go just as gentle as a lamb to Pine Tree Cottage. I thought my world had come to the end. I'd had this beloved man since I was 17, and he was 21. I didn't know how I could live without him. And I began to ask God, God, why did you take such a loving family man when all these ungodly men are out here that's never going to turn to you? I had to do a lot of praying before I could accept it. Down in my heart, I knew God knew best. And I guess some good things did come out of it. We were already a close family, but this brought us a whole lot closer together. One thing, it made me depend on God daily to see me through each day. To see me through the trials. I prayed more and more. I guess I prayed more in that 2.5 years than I ever prayed in my whole life. On April 28, 2003, we put him in Pine Tree Thomas College, about 2 blocks from the house. This was a God-sent blessing because I could walk if I had to. I could go every day to see him. One day when I went in, one of the little nurses, she was a little colored girl, and she wore clothes that kind of looked like boys, and her hair was short. Duck thought she was a boy. She said to me before I got to him, said, me and Mr. Brown had a scuffle last night. Said he didn't want me to take his clothes off, and he didn't want me to put his pajamas back on him. So we kind of laughed about it. And I went in and I fed him his breakfast, and he says, you see that dude over there? He pointing to this girl. He said, we fought all night. I said, honey, don't fight with them. They're just trying to help you. He thought for a minute, and he said, if I be good to them, they be good to me. And I said, that's right. I don't know who told him that, but I guess somebody had told him, if you be good to me. And I said, that's right. We sat and talked for a while, and he said, why am I in here? And I said, honey, you know how you scuffled with that nurse over there? And he said, yeah. I said, one night you got hold of my arms, and you would not turn loose. And I said, you was hurting me bad. And I said, Linda, we had a monitor, and Linda heard it, and Linda come in there. He had my hands. He thought he was holding something that he had to put somewhere. And Linda told him, said, Dad, turn loose, you're hurting Mama. He said, I got to put this over there. So Linda said, Mama, let's put your hands over there. So we took my hands over there and laid it on the sink, and he turned loose of them. I said, you fought with me and Linda. And I said, we couldn't handle you. Well, he seemed to understand then. Then one night I went to put him to bed, and I went in there, And I kissed him goodbye, and I told him, I said, I sure do love you. He said, I love you too, or I wouldn't be here. So that made me think that he understood why he was there, because I felt so guilty by putting him there. And I just wondered if he thought I had let him down. But that made me think that he was doing it because he knew it was best for me. I would pray all the way to the home that God would make me be able not to show how sad I was. I prayed that I could be strong for the girl's sake. And all the way home, I would thank God for seeing me through the day. And then one night, he fell and he cut his arm. He cut his arm from here, way up here, all the way to the bone. If you'd went in that room, you would have thought there was a murder. There was blood all over the floor. There was blood on the walls where he had slipped and tried to crawl up the walls. Blood on the door where he'd got a hold of the handle and tried to pull himself up. Now, they were supposed to watch them every 2 hours at night. I don't know how long he was in that situation. They rushed him to MD Anderson because it was they didn't have a trauma unit anywhere closer, so they took him out there. They sewed him up, and he went back home. 2 weeks later, on Christmas morning, they called me, Miss Brown, he's fell again, and he's busted open that wound. So we had to take him back to the doctor. They couldn't sew it up. It would have to heal, and they would have to do plastic surgery on it. They put him in Kindred Hospital until he got where he could have the plastic surgery. He went through that, and then he wasn't home but just a little while. And bless his heart, he was a worker. He was a workaholic. And they had the plastic baseboards around those rooms. Well, he was working for Texas Mission Builders. He thought he pulled all those baseboards off of that room, all the way around. He pulled the big thing that to put the clothes in, pulled it all the way over to the door. He was working. He thought he was working. He wasn't back in home very long till he fell, and he broke his shoulder in the shoulder blade. He was in the home 2 years and 6 months. On October the 14th, 2005, they called me and said, Mr. Brown won't wake up this morning. So I went down there. His mouth was so dry, and I would swab his mouth, and he would grab that sponge and suck on that sponge, but he couldn't swallow. I could give him little tiny pieces of ice, and that was all. About the 5th day, it dawned on me, he hasn't had food or water in 5 days. So I asked the doctor, can I give him some water? He says he can't swallow it. He says, I can put a tube in him. But he said, Miss Brown, I will be lengthening his death. I will not be lengthening his life. And I said, no, he wouldn't want that. And the ninth day when I went back, the nurse said, Mrs. Brown, have you given him permission to go home? And I said, no, ma'am. He said, lots of time they're just hanging on for you. He said, give him permission to go home. Sometimes that will help. I got up there at the bed beside him. I laid my head over on his, and I said, I love you, baby, but why don't you go home? And I'll be right behind you. And I told him goodbye. Well, by that time, my stomach was really giving me problems, and I told the nurse, I said, I'm going home to take a Prilosec and eat a bite, and I'll be back. I went home and took my medicine, and I was sitting there on the couch waiting for the medicine to take effect. And Sherry come in. He said, Mom, he's gone. I'd prayed so hard that God would take him home. I asked Brother Ellison, I said, what did I do wrong praying for God to take him home? He said, no, that was a prayer of mercy. We were married 58 years, September the 12th, in 2005. Duck went to be with the Lord the next month, October the 21st, the same year. When he died, Sherry had come in one day and she said, Mom, I feel so guilty. She said, "Why is it that I'm not grieving for my dad like I thought I would?" I said, "Honey, we done our grieving when we put him in the home. God give us 2.5 years to get able to turn loose and let him go home." Carl W. Duck Brown was the most wonderful husband a woman ever had. He was faithful and he was kind. He was a wonderful dad. The girls will tell you that. He loved his family. His family was the love of his life. He lived for his life and for God and his family. He coached the girls' softball team. We spent our vacations together. He would take us wherever we wanted to go and do what we wanted to do. We raised our girls in church. They were all saved before they left home. We were so proud of our family. God blessed us with 4 lovely daughters, 9 grandchildren, and 20 great-grandchildren. God has blessed us through these many years, and I praise him for it.
This morning I talked about life is tough. But then you hear a testimony such as this, and you see the greatness of God. I want to conclude with reading a passage of Scripture over in Ephesians chapter 5. And I think this passage of Scripture confirms what God will do when the family is right in their relationship with Him. In Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15, "See then that you walk circumspectly, not as fools, but as wise, redeeming the time, because the days are evil. Therefore do not be unwise, but understand what the will of the Lord is. Be not drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit, speaking to one another in psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing and making melody in your heart to the Lord, giving thanks always for all things to the God the Father in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, submitting to one another in the fear of God." That's what brings a family together. Wives, submit to your own husbands as to the Lord. For the husband is the head of the wife, as also Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, just as the church is subject to Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it, that he might sanctify and cleanse her with the washing of water by the word. In the last verse of this chapter it says, "Let each one of you in particular so love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband." Wednesday night I talked about when Jesus organized the church and the purpose of him doing that, and why he organized the church to carry out his ministry after he would be gone. About 4,000 years before he organized the church, he instituted the rite of marriage. Praise God for that. Can you imagine without it? I did not know Carl Brown that well, but I know the influence of his life. I know the father that he was, the husband that he was, the grandfather that he was. Thank God for godly men will take a stand and do what's right, even when they're not sure how in the world it's going to turn out, but willing to do it right. I encourage each of you to follow the leadership of Christ always. Don't worry about the results. Don't worry about what's going to happen. Just simply do what's right. And I guarantee you this, good will come out of it. Oh, I know that there would be some that would say, yeah, but look what happened to Mr. Brown. Look at the last few years of his life. We don't really know, but I have a strong suspicion if you could really sit down and talk with this family, you will learn that they learned a lot during these last few years of his life. They truly learned a lot. Sometimes we don't understand why terrible things happen to good people, but there's reasons for that. There's truly reason for that. I pray that these testimonies that lift up God's greatness will inspire you to continue to do what God would have you to do as well. I pray that you will always get this message. We will continue this as long as those are willing to give testimonies. Praise the Lord for it.